RP fam, welcome back. Thank you for joining me for another video. It is week 13. I have start sit for you today. I'm going over every single position with tiers to try to prep you guys for one of the most critical weeks of our fantasy season. We are getting closer and closer to fantasy playoffs. Most of those start in just a couple of weeks. So we are jockeying for playoff position or maybe just trying to squeak in. Best case scenario, we are trying to pull down that #1 seed. Regardless of where you are at, making the best decisions and the most informed decisions possible is the ultimate goal. I am here to help you do that today. Before we hop into it, if you haven't yet, click the like button on the video if you enjoy the content. Please subscribe to the channel. That means so very much. On our way to our first 1,000 subscribers, if you haven't clicked the button, you can join us along on the journey. We would love to have you. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to start with my defenses, and then I'm going to work my way to kickers. We have my top 25 quarterbacks. I went about 30 deep on wide receivers and running backs. With all of the buys this week, it was just slim pickings once you got outside of the top 25, really. And then we're going to finish with my tight ends. If you have any questions or comments, the engagement was one of the main reasons that I do these videos. Please drop all of that down below. Promise I will get back to you prior to kickoff. I check until about a half an hour before the games, and I answer every single question and comment that I receive. All right, enough stalling. Let's start with defenses. My #1 defense left after Dallas got creamed on Thursday night are the Pittsburgh Steelers. They are alone in my first tier. Tier 2 has the Miami Dolphins at the top. They have back-to-back top 4 finishes. In those games, they racked up 9 sacks, 5 picks, and a score. I think they caused plenty of turnovers in this game. They've also allowed just 64 total points over their last 4. The New York Jets are at 3, and I have the Jacksonville Jaguars against Cincinnati at 4 to end that tier. I like the matchup with Jake Browning, of course. Tier 3 begins with the Chiefs and the Pack. Now, this could go really either way because the Chiefs have had a great defense most of the season. It's gotten better and better as the year has gone on, but so has Jordan Love. So I like the Chiefs here. I think they're fine, but I do expect Jordan Love to put up some points and produce. The Bucks are at 6, and at 7, I have the Detroit Lions against New Orleans, fresh off that embarrassment on Thanksgiving. Tier 4 begins with the 49ers. They get that huge game, probably the biggest game of the week against Philadelphia. Cleveland Browns are next at 9. A little concern there because of the injury to Myles Garrett. Rounding out my top 10 in that same game are the Los Angeles Rams. I have the Atlanta Falcons at 11. They have not looked great this season, but Tim Boyle is the ultimate equalizer. In one of the ugliest games of the week, I think Atlanta posted second straight finish inside the top 12. My 5th and final tier begins with the Colts against Tennessee, and then I have the Texans against Denver at 13. The Chargers are at 14. They get New England on the road. They should be able to contain whoever ends up playing quarterback for the Patriots. They have been punchless as an offense all season. Tennessee Titans are at 15. Down at 16, I have the Philadelphia Eagles. That 49er offense is legit, and I have some hesitancy because of how banged up they have been and how many big plays they have been allowing. On to my kickers now. 3 in tier 1. Brandon McManus and Matt Gay are my first 2, and Jason Sanders is up at 3. He's made a pair of field goals now in back-to-back games with a 50+ in each of those. Opportunities are going to come against the Commanders, so I think Sanders is able to keep that hot streak going. Tier 2 begins with Jake Elliott, and I have Blake Groupie rounding out my top 5. Nick Folk gets a great matchup here against the Colts. I have him at 6, and at 7 is Harrison Butker. My 3rd tier begins with Riley Patterson. Hasn't made a field goal in 2 straight games, but he is still a good start on the road behind this excellent Lions offense. I think Detroit bounces back after Thanksgiving, and the letdown, Patterson is going to benefit from it. Jake Moody is at 9, and rounding out my top 10 is Cameron Dicker. I have Younghoe Koo in at number 11. 11, he gets a matchup with the Jets. Matt Amendola in what could be a sneaky shootout against Denver. And then Chris Boswell is my 13th ranked kicker. In my 5th and final tier, I have Will Lutz. And then finally at 15, I have Chase McLaughlin. Carolina should offer little resistance, and I think McLaughlin has a solid outing. Leading off my quarterback rankings is Tua Tagovailoa. He will smash the league's worst secondary. Since week 7, the Commanders have surrendered a whopping 16 passing scores, which is 4 more than the next closest teams, and there are 4 of them. They've also given up the 5th highest yards per attempt and the 4th most passing yards per game. I think Tagovailoa punishes Washington with an endless barrage of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Jalen Hurts is in at 2 in that game with San Francisco, and rounding out my top 3 is Patty Mahomes against Green Bay. Tier 2 begins with CJ Stroud at 4. He is that dude. He ranks 2nd in passing yards, 3rd in yards per attempt, and 6th in passer rating. Now, over the last 6 weeks, the Broncos have actually allowed the 5th lowest yards per attempt and the 2nd fewest passing tutties. So we're going strength versus strength here. I will take the Rookie of the Year and the Dark Horse MVP candidate. Trevor Lawrence rounds out my top 5, and at 6, I have Brock Purdy up against Philadelphia. Tier 3 begins with Justin Herbert. I like him to stay hot. And Kyler Murray is next at 8. He has leveraged his legs early in his return to cover up some mediocre passing numbers, and I believe that recipe remains the same versus an elite Steelers passing defense. We have an ailing group of pass catchers in Arizona. He's going to have no choice. Pittsburgh has allowed bottom 10 numbers in yards per attempt, also the 4th lowest passer rating since back in week 9. Sam Howell is in at 9. He hasn't thrown less than 42 passes in a game since way back in week number 6, and he's been a quarterback 1 in each of the last 5 weeks. He leads the NFL in passing yardage and attempts, as well as air yards. Miami has been lights out as a secondary since the return of Jalen. They've really been able to turn it around, so I think Howell has to lean on that volume again in what could end up being a shootout in this Dolphins-Washington game. Tier 4 starts with Jordan Love. He is the last player in my top 10, and he's been incredible over the last 3 weeks. He's had finishes of quarterback 12, 9, and QB 5. Since week 10, he ranks 9th in yards per attempt, 5th in passer rating, and 7th in completion percentage over expected. I will give it to you, the competition he's faced in 2 out of those 3 games has been questionable. This game against the Chiefs is going to be a true test for him. I do kind of hate it, but I think Love goes a month straight with QB1 performances. Number 11 here is Jared Goff against New Orleans, and rounding out my QB1s in week 13, I have Matthew Stafford in a pretty difficult matchup against Cleveland. Tier 5 begins with Russell Wilson against Houston. He's been able to help out owners with his touchdowns and efficiency. He has not had the attempts that you would like, but I think in this game against Houston, he should be able to find a score or 2. Gardner Minshew against Tennessee is a great matchup. I like him to be able to produce, and Kenny Pickett finds himself in the top 15 this week, mostly because of this matchup against Arizona. He is going to get the opportunity to prove that last week was not a one-off, and that the Matt Canada removal really is paying immediate dividends. The Cards have given up the 2nd most passing scores, as well as the 4th highest completion percentage over expected since week number 7. I think Pickett has a chance legitimately to sneak into quarterback 1 territory and build on a solid performance. Next to tier 6, Derek Carr leads it off. He drops in my rankings because of a banged up wide receiver room. Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed are both likely to miss Sunday's game, so the upside for Carr is limited. Baker Mayfield is next against Carolina. He always has a chance to put up quarterback 1 numbers, but more often than not, he's a mid-level QB2. That's where I have him ranked here. Jake Browning could surprise in a matchup with Jacksonville, who've been beatable in the secondary as of late, and Bryce Young is at 19 against Tampa. Now, when we get to tier 7, if you are having to start one of these guys, you're in trouble. Honestly, there is really little hope for anyone in this tier. Even in super flex leagues, you're probably going to want to go with a high upside skill position player. Injuries and the bye-pocalypse here are brutal. But from 20 to 23, I go Levis, Bailey Zappi, Desmond Ridder, and then Tim Boyle. On to running backs, and as usual, Christian McCaffrey is up at number 1. He will have no issues destroying a Philly run defense that has allowed the second highest explosive run rate since week number 7. Number 2 is Rachaad White. He skyrockets into my top 3 for the first time on the heels of an epic Week 12 performance where he averaged 6.7 yards per carry against the Colts. The usage all season for him has been staggering, and this matchup with Carolina means there is going to be little resistance. White is going to post his 6th straight top 18 finish, and he has exploding volcano level upside in this game. Tier 2 begins with Kyren Williams. 22 touches, 204 total yards, a pair of tutties last week. Now he gets Cleveland. They allow the highest explosive run rate, the 9th highest missed tackles per attempt, and the 3rd highest yards after contact per attempt since back in week number 7. Williams' encore this week will be impressive. Bijan Robinson is next at 4. He's finally getting the usage that he deserves. And rounding out my top 5 is Zach Moss, who immediately slides into must-start territory this week because of Jonathan Taylor's injury. In his first matchup against the Titans, Moss racked up nearly 200 total yards on 25 touches. Might be another big one incoming. Tier 3 begins with Austin Eckler at 6, and at 7 I have Isaiah Pacheco against the Pack. Number 8 is Derrick Henry. He's going to get back over that 100-yard rushing threshold for the first time since back in week 8 against Indy. The Colts struggle against the zone concepts that King Henry prefers. This means a positive game script and the usage that owners need as the playoffs approach. The King gets back a big game here. Tier 4 begins with Jahmyr Gibbs, and rounding out my top 10 is Ramondre Stevenson. He has come alive over the last 3 contests, averaging 21 touches and over 110 total yards. We know the Patriots do not want to throw the ball at all, if at all possible, so Mondre is going to have no issues keeping it rolling against the Chargers. They've surrendered top 10 production to backs all year. At 11 is DeAndre Swift, and rounding out my RB1s in week 13 is Travis Etienne against Cincy. Tier 5 begins with Alvin Kamara. He is my lucky number 13. He will have his work cut out for him against a very good front in Detroit. They have allowed the 7th lowest missed tackles and also the 2nd lowest yards after contact per attempt this season. I think Kamara's volume is what he leans on as usual. That will continue to carry him. The passing game usage is going to help as well, but do not expect a monster day from Alvin. At 14, I have David Montgomery in that same game. And next up is Devin Singletary. This guy's taken over the lead duties for a surging offense. Over the last 3 weeks, he's playing over 80% of the snaps. He's averaging 22.3 touches and 117 total yards. Better yet, Denver has been awful against rushers since back in week 7. They are bottom 8 in allowing explosive runs and in yards after contact per attempt. Nobody has allowed more missed tackles per attempt as well. Singletary has legit top 8 upside. Tier 6 starts with Joe Mixon, and then the Steelers backs Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris are back-to-back at 17 and 18. Breece Hall is at 19. He not only has to deal with Tim Boyle as a quarterback, but a horrible offensive line as well. And the matchup only makes matters worse. The Falcons surrender the 2nd fewest points to backs on the season. Hall has the talent to break any run and take it to the house, but I would not bank on it with the fantasy playoffs looming. There's more risk here than we would like. Tier 7 starts with rounding out my top 20 and Javonte Williams. He's averaging 21 touches and 85 total yards since week 7, top 20 numbers there. He's also 6th in explosive run rate. However, Houston's front has been an unstoppable force as of late. They're top 12 in yards after contact per attempt. stopping the explosive runs and stuff rate as well, so Williams will earn every yard. At 21 is Jerome Ford, tough matchup with the Rams, and at 22 I have James Conner on the road against Pittsburgh. Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert are my last running back twos in week 13. They both get Washington. They're both dealing with injuries. For Mostert, it is that ankle and the knee. Ensure that he's active if you're starting him. Achane looks like he is going to play, but that just makes this backfield unpredictable. I am going to buy the Miami backfield because the offense is so good at this price, but I do not want to overplay either of these guys unless one of them ends up being out. Tier 8 begins rounding out my top 25 with Brian Robinson Jr. He saw his passing game usage last week disappear once Antonio Gibson was back, and he also played just 45% of the snaps here. Now, Miami's defense has swallowed up rushers over the last 6 weeks. They've allowed the lowest missed tackles per attempt and the 6th lowest explosive run rate. Also, nobody has given up less rushing yards. B-Rob probably has to be started because it is the Bipocalypse after all, but you are not loving it. At 26, I have Tajay Spears and A.J. Dillon, should he be the only back in Green Bay to play, which I think he is. R.I.P. Aaron Jones is in at 27. Chuba Hubbard is at 28. He has a wide range of outcomes this week after the Panthers cleaned house. Now, the matchup here is horrible to begin with, but the volume just might swing in his favor. Expect 10 touches in this game. You hope for the 15 to 20. Either way, he's going to need a tutty to hit for owners. My 9th and final tier is one you really don't want to touch unless you absolutely have to. Tyler Algier, Ezekiel Elliott, Jeff Wilson, who's probably the third back this week for Miami, Royce Freeman, Kareem Hunt, Antonio Gibson, and finally Dameon Pierce. That rounds out my running backs in week 13. Almost through here. Make sure you like and subscribe, and now on to wide receivers. Tyreek Hill leads it off as usual, and at 2 I have Amon-Ra St. Brown. He continues to dominate as the wide receiver 4 in fantasy. He's racked up a 28% target share and a 35.6% first read share, also producing an impressive 2.79 yards per route run. St. Brown has been one of, if not the most consistent wideout all year. He is going to shred the Saints, who do not have Marshawn Lattimore. At 3 is Keenan Allen, and at 4 I have A.J. Brown against San Francisco. My second tier begins with Mike Evans. He ranks 2nd in deep targets. He's racked up 2.57 yards per route run, a 41% air yard share, and a 30% first read share, showing no signs of slowing down. He is going to continue his tear against the Panthers. Now, they are allowing the 4th fewest points per game to receivers, so the matchup is not ideal, but Big Mike has 31 targets over his last 3, so I think the volume and the talent win out. Michael Pittman Jr. soars to number 6 with a great matchup, and at 7, same thing here, it is Jalen Waddle against Washington. Tier 3 begins with Brandon Ayuk against Philly, and at 9 I have Tank Dell against Denver. The last wide receiver in my top 10 is Jamar Chase. He should bounce back with this decent matchup. He had a 46% air yard share, 30% first read share last week, and he compiled nearly 3 yards per route run with Jake Browning at the controls. Those are encouraging numbers. I think he is fine. Tier 4 begins with Calvin Ridley. He's heating up, and I think he is actually the jag to play after diving into the numbers. My last wide receiver 1 this week is Puka Nacua. He has a 27% target share, 31% air yard share, and first read share, and a 2.25 yards per route run since Cooper Kupp returned and took over a full-time role in the offense. Basically, that means that Stafford is going to continue to feed the rookie, and he has. We do not need to worry about Kupp. Cleveland has been tough on perimeter wideouts, but I am buying the volume from Stafford. At 13 is Devontae Smith against San Francisco, and he finishes my 4th tier. Garrett Wilson is next, and I have Adam Thielen at 15. He has struggled mightily since week number 8, but I am keeping the faith in him here in an excellent matchup against the Bucs. Tampa Bay has bled wide receiver production. They allow top 5 points per target, the second most receiving yards to slant wideouts this year. The former Viking bounces back and has a solid day. From 16 to 19, I have Christian Kirk, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, and finally Deontay Johnson. He gets a matchup with Arizona. Last player in my top 20 also kicks off tier 6. It is Rashee Rice. He just might have had his breakthrough game in week 12. He posted a 29% target share and air yard share, a 31% first read share, and an extremely impressive 4.46 yards per route run. The Pack have surrendered top 12 numbers to perimeter wideouts since back in week 7, so I think Rice is poised to stack another solid outing. Nico Collins is at 21. Make sure he's healthy and good to go. And at 22 is Courtland Sutton against Houston. Chris Godwin is at 23, and my last wide receiver 2 in week 13 is DeAndre Hopkins. He has healthy metrics basically across the board since Will Levis took over. Unfortunately, they have amounted to less than 50 yards receiving per game because that target quality has suffered. Now, since week 6, the Colts have surrendered just a single touchdown to perimeter wideouts that are not named Mike Evans, so I think the ceiling is certainly capped for Nuke in this game. The last player in my top 25 is Terry McLaurin, and tier 7 begins with Marquise Brown. He is likely to receive a massive workload if he is able to play while he's working his way back from that heel injury. Now, Joey Porter Jr. may end up shadowing him, and that certainly limits Brown's upside, so he is just a volume play here against a tough opponent. 27 to 29, it is George Pickens, Jaden Reed, and Josh Downs. They end my 7th tier. My 8th and final tier goes Curtis Samuel against Miami, Romeo Doubs against Kansas City, Demario Douglas against the Chargers, and T. Higgins against Jacksonville. The last 2 wide receivers I will highlight include Amari Cooper against the Rams, and finally Drake London against the Jets. He barely makes this list because of the brutal matchup. The Jets have the league's number 1 secondary. They've held receivers to under 20 fantasy points per game, so I would bench these last guys in my 8th tier unless you are desperate and out of options. Final position group before I bid you farewell for the weekend. We'll hit tight ends quickly. Travis Kelce, as usual, the only one in tier number 1. Tier 2 starts with George Kittle. This guy ranks 1st in deep targets, 3rd in receiving yards, and 3rd in yard after the catch, and he's set up for a huge day against the Eagles. He is going to operate as the number 2 passing option in their attack. Philadelphia has given up the most receiving scores to the position. They also allow tight end 1 numbers on a per game basis. Sammy Ballgame is in at 3, and starting tier 3 is Evan Ingram. Dalton Schultz rounds out my top 5. He is a must start if active against a Broncos defense that has given up more fantasy points per game and more receiving yards to the position than anybody. Monster day if he plays. Tier 4 starts with Pat Freiermuth. He dominated again last week. He had a 62% route run rate, a 33.3% target share, and a 36.6% air yard share. He also had a 38% first read share, posting an otherworldly 5.22 yards per route run. In English, Friar Tuck was elite, all caps. Now, with the current state of the position, I expect the Muth to be a locked-in tight end 1 for the rest of the season. Hopefully, you're able to add him off of waivers when I suggested it. At number 7 is David Njoku, and at 8, I have Logan Thomas against Miami. Number 9 and the last player in this tier is Trey McBride if he goes against Pitt. Tier 5 begins with a pair of Saints. I have Taysom Hill and Juwan Johnson. I think each of these guys are solid options in a plus matchup against the Lions. Detroit has surrendered the most touchdowns to tight ends and top 12 production overall. With a ton of skill players likely out for the Saints, New Orleans is going to lean on these 2 guys. Number 12 is Dallas Goedert, questionable to go. He's dealt with an injury all week. if he is good to go, he is a borderline tight end 1 option this week. San Francisco has been great against the position in 2023. Lucky number 13 is Cade Otton, and my 6th and final tier goes Hunter Henry, and then the Atlanta brothers in Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith. These guys are desperation dart throws, and they have a basement level floor, especially in this matchup. And with that, we will call it a week. I really hope you guys enjoyed the content today. I hope you learned something. Drop your questions and your comments down below. I will answer your start sit questions. I check till about a half an hour before game time. Make sure you like the video if you haven't done it. Subscribe to the channel as well. That means the world to me. This is Relentless Press. I am your host, Abraham Opat. Have a fantastic weekend. Good luck. Go get that dub, and I'll see you next time.